So this is my Unit 5 project, and I decided my theme would be about crime and struggle. Down here, this paragraph is kind of showing like how, or not how, kind of like why I decided to change my message from a more personal perspective to focusing on a more global issue with like my meaning. So with my last project with Unit 4, I focused on the state of mind and mental health from a personal perspective, and for my outcome with that project, I decided to create like four self-portraits, all showing the progression of my mental health personally. With this project, I wanted to go further from that personal perspective and focus on a more global meaning, kind of showing a more environmental like message rather than a personal perspective, using something personal to kind of convey a message that focuses on the environment or social factors as well. So moving on to my artist research, before I go on, I've only really used like two of these artists to actually inspire my outcome. But these are kind of showing like my thought process beforehand. So these are all like still pretty relevant, but we'll go through them anyway. So starting off, we've got Kinde Wiley. So the first thing I noticed about his portraits is that a lot of the subjects, or pretty much all the subjects really, have this more realistic approach, and in the background is a more vibrant colour scheme. More so like the realistic approach is what I use to kind of inspire like my ideas. But the vibrant colour scheme also like played a factor as well in like setting the tone for like what I wanted my ideas and my outcome to be like. Moving on, we've got Elizabeth Payton. So originally, I actually wanted her to inspire like a lot of my ideas, but I only really used I think one or two. But anyway, like her artwork, I felt at first it looks really similar to like some illustration that you find in books. It just I don't know why, but it just has that like striking like aesthetic to it. It looks like it's just come out of a book for some reason. And also it's not just like these over here, like some of her other work here, like for this one example, you can see like a lot of the detailing as well, which I didn't really use as inspiration. I'm more focused on like this illustrated feel that you can see with a lot of her art. Then moving on to Truck Close, the main thing I liked about his artwork was that this pixelated feel that you can get, kind of like taking the form of a more realistic like art piece or something, or using like pixels to kind of like form it together or something. It looks like really complex at first, but if you dig deep, you can see like the different like pixels that have like created the form of this like artwork. So moving on, we've got Jonathan Yeo. Like the main thing I pointed out with his portraits is like you can kind of see how it was layered together. Like you can see like these little segments here of different like color tones, and to me, I thought this was kind of like how the portrait was put together, like the different layering, the process. You can kind of see like how it was like made with a lot of his artwork. Then Cindy Sherman, what I liked about her artwork was that she mixes like coloured like segments with like black and white in her portraits, and also with a lot of her other artwork has this distorted feel, which was something I did use for my last project, but not so much with this one. Really. And then finally, we've got Liu Shanfud. Similar to Jonathan Yeo, like you can kind of see like how his portraits were layered with different color schemes. It's a little bit vague with these, like you can kind of see it over here. But another thing, and this is probably like the main thing I took from his portraits, was that a lot of his artwork had this distorted feel to it, which is what I liked most about his artwork. So moving on, I decided to go deeper, and this is something I didn't really like continue forward, but it's here and it's kind of showing like what I was thinking at the time, see if it could inspire future ideas. So I decided to research like how music was communicated in art, and I came across these two. So Wassily Kandinsky, who's an artist I've actually like researched for a few other projects before, and also Melissa McCracken. So their artwork's down there. With Kandinsky, like, I liked his abstract feel and the different shapes that he uses. It's just really unorthodox, and there's a reason that I've used him for like a lot of projects. Like I'm a big fan of the abstract feel that is envisioned in his artwork, like the different colours, the shapes, like the different lines as well. And then moving on to Melissa McCracken, what I liked about her artwork is that it kind of has this like space like feel to it, and mixing that with abstract and a lot of vibrant color scheme, like it, like what she envisions in her artwork is kind of like she expresses like her feeling when listening to music, and like the different colors are kind of meaning like what she's feeling at the time when listening to something, and like oh, but then I decided to research how music was communicated in art. I don't really use this too much going forward, but it's something that I thought of before and could have used later on. I decided to research two artists who communicate music and art, both using abstracts, and these are Wassily Kandinsky and also Melissa McCracken. So starting off with Wassily Kandinsky, I've actually researched him a lot in my other projects, and mainly due to like his abstract feel, like with the different lines and the shapes and also the color schemes, they can convey so much different meaning. It's kind of like a really versatile art style. It can pretty much mean a lot of different things, but with Wassily Kandinsky, he mainly uses it to describe music. And then we've got Melissa McCracken. Like, her artwork to me is kind of like depictions of like space and kind of like the mind as well. And with her art, she says that the different color tones and like the abstract feel is kind of describing her feeling when she listens to music. And to me, like personally, like the main thing that inspires me is like the space looking aesthetic, and also you can kind of see a lot. It kind of looks like flowers or like nature or something, but mainly the whole aesthetic is like space and more abstract with like a lot of vibrant colors blending together. Then I decided to note down the Clarendon Art Gallery, which I visited. These are all photos of different artwork that I could have used, a lot of ideas. Not really like looking back at like if they're similar to like artists that I've researched. These are mainly just like different art styles that I've found that I could potentially use for future ideas. And then to the side here, these are two artists that I found from this like, gallery that I've also researched as well. These being like Simon Kenny and also Todd White. Again, this is kind of continuing from what I said earlier, this paragraph here. And then I decided to focus on some extra artist research. At this point in the project, I decided that the rest of my ideas going forward, I wanted to be inspired by like street art and graffiti. To me, I feel like street art and a lot of graffiti is kind of like a solid link to like, crime, because graffiti itself is kind of considered a crime as it's like vandalism as well, and also like where like it's also located like out in the open in the city or something. It's kind of like the same environment when a lot of crime happens out in the open. So first one here, you got Don Pattinson, which kind of mixes like portraiture with street art with like the different like colours, like it's kind of like splattered around. Like it looks like well, I think it is spray paint actually. But yeah, her mix with like colour and also portraits being a more realistic approach as well is something I took from her work. Oh, but, oh my! I'm gonna have to restart. So I then decided to research two more artists, and at this point in the project, I decided that my overall aesthetic and style, I wanted to be a more street art like aesthetic, also including bits of graffiti in there as well. I decided this because I felt that street art and graffiti would be a solid link to my theme of crime. As with graffiti, the style overall is considered to be like a crime due to kind of like where it's located out in the streets, and also how like it's seen as vandalism, which is a crime. So with my artist research here, I decided to research David Walker, mainly due to like the obvious like street art aesthetic that you can see with his portraits, with like the vibrant color schemes, like the obvious use of like spray paint. Not only that, due to like the realism of his portraits as well.
Then I also researched Don Pattinson. At this point, I wanted to create portraits that have this like vandalized like effect to it. It's kind of like having a portrait and putting graffiti over it to kind of like show like my meaning of crime. And with Don Patterson here, it's kind of like these like works are kind of like what I envisioned at first, or kind of like developing it further with more ideas. And then down here, these are just reference images for like these sketches over here. So the sketches here, these are kind of like an opportunity to kind of get a grasp of graffiti and kind of like what the style I wanted my portraits to be, because I still wanted a realistic approach at this point, but I was kind of just testing like to see like how well it would probably fit like the text. I later like toned it down a little because I didn't want it too detailed. I want it detailed enough, but like not too over the top. It's kind of unlike me, to be fair. So here I created two mood boards. This is all photography that I took in like locations such as Digbeth, Shirley, and a lot of skate parks where a lot of graffiti is shown. And with this mood board over here, I used a lot of murals that I found on Google as well as album covers as well, because at this point I wanted to include album covers to kind of convey the theme of crime, as I wanted like the personal aspect of my project with this one here is kind of like taking like my love for music and implementing it into my theme of crime, because a lot of the artists I listen to in music talk a lot about crime and also a lot of violence as well in the streets. So I felt that would be a good link to my theme. And then I decided to do a bunch of historical research, mainly the tapestry shown here. Like these are usually shown to kind of show like the progression of like a battle or something. And I took this idea of progression and I wanted this to go forward to kind of show like with my portraits, kind of show how someone's been corrupted by like the environment that they've lived in, like how it's changed them and shaped them into who in excuse the stutter, shape them into like who they are basically. And this is just like a bunch of research on this. Then I moved on to contextual research and showing like a bunch of the environmental effects that crime and violence have on well the environment. And also took a lot of news articles that I could have used for like ideas as well. Then I decided to visit a lot of locations, namely like town centre, Kings Heath, like places where a lot of crime has happened. But I decided to like take photos of alleyways as well, which are notorious for like crime as well. Um, Again, this is research that I could have used but didn't end up using. So with like my love for music, like this is taken at a D Block here at concert, and with my intention of drawing like rappers as well. I could have probably used this for ideas, but I never ended up using them really. Again, these are discussing like the environmental factors that crime has. So over here, I've decided to go in depth about the environmental and social impacts crime and struggle has on the environment. Then going down, I decided to start my ideas being like experimental with like the different materials and also techniques that I've used. So here I've used cross hatching inspired by Chuck Close with his pixelated effect, and with this idea over here, I decided to use graphite because I wanted to capture this realistic aesthetic. Then going down, I used watercolor to kind of capture this like illustrative feel that I've seen with Elizabeth Payton, and also using like mixed media as well, using different colors to kind of keep it like interesting rather than just the bland like original color scheme, which is like kind of what I wanted to use with like my future ideas going forward and my outcome, like having it a different color. And with this one, I used acrylics to kind of create a more realistic approach as well, kind of capture the texture like a bit better. Then I started to photocopy a lot of different ideas. Oh, actually, yeah, these are down here. My bad. I photocopied these, like added a bunch of graffiti over to kind of convey my theme a bit further. As they're rappers, I decided to use like their lyrics because they mainly like rap about like crime and also violence as well. I wanted to integrate this into like my ideas to kind of convey my meaning further, more in depth. Moving back here, I decided to play around with like how I would convey graffiti and also the street art, like style, like using like I think I've used watercolor and also acrylic pens here. Use purely watercolors here. I tested out some oil pastels here, but personally I didn't think this one turned out that good. And again, here's the reference images for these over here and all the ones above as well. This is kind of intending what I wanted to communicate with my ideas going forward. It's kind of what I discussed earlier, that I wanted to use graffiti to kind of convey the theme of crime, as I'm using graffiti as a reference to crime, as the style itself is crime, basically. Bro, I'm gonna have to restart again. So with this paragraph over here, it's kind of like describing what I wanted to communicate with my ideas. As I've said before, I wanted to use like, the aesthetic of graffiti and street art to communicate my theme due to like the links that the style has with my message. As like graffiti itself is kind of considered like a criminal act, being like vandalism. So it would be only right to kind of link that with the theme of crime and using like subjects, specifically rappers that sing about like crime and violence. Like all these factors kind of like link together in a way for my theme. And moving on to, I focused on like the photography part of my inspiration. So I went in depth and looked at the portrait side of it and kind of used these as like potential like influences for like ideas going forward. And, like how I wanted my outcome to kind of look like and how I wanted some other ideas to look like having this like mixed feel with like different colour schemes and also like this unrealistic approach, this graffiti like style as well. I then researched Paul Seawright, who's a photographer who takes photos of like murder scenes that look innocent at first until you know the backstory behind it. I noticed this was pretty similar to like a lot of the photography I did on locations. I know Birmingham isn't really like the most pleasant area, but if you showed like a random person who knows nothing about like the crime rate in Birmingham, you'd think it's pretty innocent. Which is kind of what I was kind of like what I was thinking of when I was saying these are similar to like my photography on location. So I then visited the National Portrait Gallery and I just took photos of various different portraits that I found, seeing if they could probably inspire like more ideas and possibly like linking to artists that I've researched beforehand. So with this one here, this one stood out to me the most as when I first saw this, I immediately thought that this was meant to be like a vandalized look and feel to the artwork. It gives off this like destroyed vibe, which is kind of like part of the aesthetic I wanted to do with my ideas and outcome with like the graffiti and street art and stuff. Moving on, so I still wanted like part of this project to have a personal aspect to it and a more relatable like aspect as well. So I decided to draw like rappers that are from Birmingham. So I played around with this one. Like I used a different color scheme, so I used blue instead of like the original color from the reference. And again, I played around with like the graffiti style, like with the text as well. I focused on like song names. Also added lyrics here as well. All again related to like the theme of crime. Down here, I decided to research like the history of rap, kind of going into like the in depth as well, seeing researching something that I don't specifically like listen to, but kind of like researching where it came from, basically. So I researched like Tupac and like the message he was like conveying with his songs as well, being of like racism, like politics, and, like the environment as well. A lot of like social, like, environmental factors as well. So I then researched like UK rap history, specifically like grime as well, and how like US rap kind of like came over to the UK, and that's how this was kind of made. And I also researched like modern UK rap, which is what I listen to. how it's kind of like evolved from like grime as well. And then here's some like photography portraits as well that I've kind of taken from this kind of like collection that I found in a book, like, all like being of like environmental and also like social factors as well. Kind of like also inspiring like the sudden like change from like my project being like more personal to environmental. Like these are kind of just examples that I could have used as well. But I didn't end up using these, but these were there kind of. But there if I needed them. Then moving on to Henry Tonks, he's like another artist that I researched. With his portraits, what I liked about them is that like they give off this like mutilated feel, which I thought linked well with like as part of my theme, like violence is a part of like crime as well. And with this like mutilated feel in his portraits, I felt that could have worked, but I ended up not using this. But yeah, a lot of the research that I have in this project I didn't end up using, but they're there anyway as they were like potential like sources for inspiration. So here I decided to go in depth with like the graffiti style. So I made a whole page here experimenting with like different fonts, color schemes. I wanted to like blend different colors into text and also like different materials as well. So I mainly chose to use like acrylic pens as they reflected like the same aesthetic as spray paint. But also used oil pastels, watercolor, colored pencils as well, seeing what I could find and if they would probably be better. But I ended up just choosing acrylic pens as a whole. So here I'm thinking about like what I wanted to do for my final, specifically working sustainably as with my last project I only used like A1 like paper as like the canvas for my final. But with this one I wanted to work not only sustainable but also like bigger as well. So I tested out a lot of different like canvases. So like wood, cardboard. But I found personally that wood worked the best as it was a solid foundation and not only it was sustainable as well, but like I could go like really big with it as well. And down here, these are the ideas from my final, all being sustainable resources, so cardboard, wood. But these are the only two like canvases that I used. But yeah, they still fit the sustainable practice. And again, here's the reference images for each. Um, with one part of my final, I wanted the background to kind of resemble like an album cover. So I created small like samples using like watercolors and acrylics to kind of like reflect the aesthetic of like an album cover. So here I just tested each of them, see how they turned out really. And here's the plan for my final outcome. Um, basically I was describing the canvas that I wanted to work with. Um, I decided to stick to just one like, large canvas instead of multiple, kind of abandoning like the series. But yeah, and then this is my overall final. So again, I've showed the process here. I ended up using only acrylic pens um, with this outcome, but I also added like actual acrylic paint as well. But overall, the design was massive. I think it was about A0, probably even bigger. And yeah, these are just like the improvements that I would make, possibly like using multiple resources into one. Like no. So here's the plan for my final outcome, kind of discussing how I wanted to work sustainably, how I wanted to incorporate like the different subjects being both local and from different parts of the UK. And here I did note that I did want to use like materials, but I eventually just decided to stick with just acrylic markers and also acrylic paint as well, as I felt with acrylic markers that they produced like a really smoother texture and complemented the aesthetic of like street art just better than with other materials that I've worked with. Watercolor was another close contender, but I don't think any of them could have beaten like acrylic like pens. that I felt for this style. And then moving on to actual final. So this here shows the process that I went through, um, kind of going in depth with like the detail as well that I went in for. Not too much compared to like other like outcomes that I've done, but it fits the style that I was going for anyway. And here is me just talking about it, um, kind of showing like the immense scale that I went through. I felt this is like a really massive improvement from the last project. The last one, I did A1. I had an A1 canvas, but this one I think it's A0, probably even bigger. Also discussing like the improvements I would make. So filling out the space was another big thing. I did eventually fill the entire canvas, but a lot of the space, specifically up here and around here, was kind of like hasn't got too much detail to it. You know, with other projects, I do want to fill it with as much detail as possible. This was mainly because of like time constraints, because I made this on like the last week before I had to hand in the project. So I was kind of in a rush to kind of get this finished as soon as possible. And yeah, another thing was I underestimated how big this would be. Like, I actually originally planned of filling both sides, like having one side covering, like, well, having one side being covered with like portraits and the other side having the same, but like from with local subjects as well. Well, literally, it took me a week to fill one side, so there's no way I was getting that done. So I decided to just stick with like multiple portraits on one side. Well, to be fair, there's not too many here. A lot of it is just graffiti, but yeah. Yeah, and this is just like to show how big like the canvas was. This is me next to it. You can see it's absolutely massive. And here, this is kind of just describing like what each like text means. These are all like so like the text here is kind of just like either like album titles, like song titles. I didn't actually include like lyrics into this final. I used a lot of like symbolism as well to kind of indicate like albums as well. But overall, like the graffiti style of it is kind of meant to convey like the theme of crime, and also the song titles as well. But yeah, they kind of both act as like symbolism for my theme, and also the subjects as well, as they're the ones speaking about it. So there's a long list of like the different texts and like giving like a definition for each of them. Here's all the reference images that I used. Here's some of the feedback I was given. So I think this was about like making it look more worn down, adding like lyrics and quotes to it. And here's my final evaluation. Kind of like going through like the improvements I wanted to make, what I want to take forward. And yeah, that's it.